Welcome to MEternal. I am Kenya Gibson, and I'm here with my co-host who is here virtually, Jay Wilson of Melanated Moms. Hello, Jay. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Kenya?
Good. Glad we are connecting today. And we are live in studio today with two very, very special guests. We have the Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynoso. Welcome to the MEternal platform.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And we have Helena Grant, who is a midwife.
Hi.
Greetings. Yes.
Nice
And
to meet
you both
you.
have a very special connection and story. So I want to start with that.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm Antonio. I'm the borough president of the greatest borough in the city of New York, which is Brooklyn. So I wanted to first start off with that. But our stories connected when my wife was giving birth. And originally we were going to go to a private hospital because we had good insurance. And when we went to the private hospital, after a couple of visits, we noticed that there weren't any single rooms, there were no midwives, and we had been doing basic research related to what a healthy birth would look like. And a place that had the single rooms and a midwife was Woodhull. So I asked my wife if she would be interested in taking a tour. We did. It was amazing, and we decided that Woodhull would be the place where we're going to birth both of our boys, Alejandro and Andres. Ms. Grant was my midwife, or my wife's midwife, and you're going to learn a lot about her through these conversations, but she she knew I was a council member, or she found out I was a council member. I don't know how, but somebody must have told her. And she decided that every single time my wife and I went in for a check-in, she would pull me aside and give me those 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and just drop knowledge and say, hey, just want to educate you on maternal health and what's happening. And I think that there's a general education level that most people have on maternal health, but until you're not paying attention to the stats and then feeling helpless as your wife is about to have a child and understanding that she's 10 times more likely to die during childbirth than her white counterpart, it doesn't really hit home. So through those conversations, I became an advocate for maternal health, and I made a commitment that should I become a borough president or any other elected office, that I would make this one of my primary platforms and initiatives. And I hope that I've followed through and made Ms. Grant happy, which is ultimately, like, my job is to make her happy. So she'll talk to you and let you know if I'm progressing on it.
And that's not his job.
Well, you're doing a lot of great things. You have a whole maternal health agenda, which I
Yes.
want to talk a little bit about. So you had mentioned earlier that Black women or women of color are 9.4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related complications than their white counterparts. And you have your historic maternal health agenda that's kicked off with the Maternal Health Task Force. Can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that?
So yes, we have a task force of 8 Black women are part of the task force. So I only know so much, and the little I got from Ms. Grant. So Ms. Grant is a co-chair of the Maternal Health Task Force. So we put in the foremost experts in maternal health together, and they kind of just tell me what to do. So you got 8 Black women in a room making things happen, and then just kind of telling me when I got to jump. And I just ask how high. So it's been a great experience. I like to think that I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I want to make sure I get it right. And I want to do it the right way, and I want to go all the way. I want to be bold. So this Maternal Health Task Force has been guiding me since day one. And as we go through, you'll hear a lot of the progress that we've been able to make on a lot of the initiatives that we decided to jump off on.
Awesome. I want to go back to midwifery for a second and the role that it plays in communities of color. Can you just elaborate on that and the importance of why it should exist and why it's important to us as a community?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, from a historical conceptualization, we know that midwives are the mother of all health professions. And as people of color, we have this inherent understanding of that, but we're not allowed to really actualize that, especially in the United States of America. So when you look at the world over, anywhere from Europe to Asia to Africa to South America, you have midwives as a mainstay, as community health workers, as healers, and as the primary persons that people go to for their health care in community. And this is the way it always was. And so with the advent of American obstetrics, we see a shift in that. And so a lot of people are caring for people who don't look like them, who don't understand them, who don't understand their culture, who just stop in from wherever they're from, do a shift and there's no relationship that is established. And so
Right.
midwives really bring that essential quality back, even if they're not from the community, because midwives practice under what we call the shared decision-making model, where it's really about giving the client access to an abundance of information and really working with the client, the partner, and the family to make collaborative decisions. It's not, this is what's going on and this is what you need to do. And so when people are partners in their care, they're going to show up and actualize their care. They're the main, they should be the center of their team, and often they're not. And so midwifery aims to change that trajectory.
That's great. And you were schooling me before the podcast started about the difference between giving birth and the term delivery. So why don't you share with our audience the misconception?
Oh, delivery is such a dirty, dastardly word because historically it really doesn't even show up in the medical literature until we see the advent of white male obstetrics. The word even obstetrics, the etymology of the word obstetrics means midwife. It means to stand in front of the woman while she gives birth. And so now we have this thing where people say they delivered someone. Well, really? That makes the provider, whether it's a doctor or a midwife, because midwives use that word falsely too, to own the process and to become the active participant while the client is passive. You did this for her. You delivered her. Really, she did all the work. Through blood, through sweat, through tears, she did the work, or the birthing person did the work. And so what we're not activating around is the energy that these words cause in the birthing space, where people just are totally absent from their experience, and they're forced to be absent from their experience because it's not about them. It's about someone doing things to them. And so it's really important to change those words and really understand what they mean, because birth is not supposed to be a violence, people do something to you process. It is supposed to be where you're active and you're in control of that process.
And I know Jay wants to chime in.
Oh, yeah. So you said so many great points there. The first thing that jumped out to me is power sharing, right? So understanding how those words carry power and take it away. I think that helps to point us in the direction of understanding how these inequities have become so elaborate, right? So if we're listening to a doctor or a medical provider saying that they have delivered us, and we're using it in that same context, it's taken away that mom or that birthing person's ability to connect with the entire experience of the birth, right? So when we think about it from that way, we understand why there are a lot of women or birthing people who are hesitant to use their voice or to feel that they have any type of involvement in the birthing process, right? I think it also talks a lot about how you mentioned about the change that white obstetrics had on our healthcare system, right? So when they changed the meaning of midwives to birth, through media, through community conversations and all of these things, it took away the power that these midwives had with delivering families here I am using the wrong word, with participating in the birth with the families, and literally robbed them of the ability of empowering that birthing person to be a part of it, to be a part of the experience. And it put those doctors in the space, or those medical providers in the space of almost a godlike delivery system, right? Like, without me, you couldn't do any of these things, right? So I think about that even in my own births, or the births that some of my moms have. I had the opportunity to sit in on a birth with one of my community members, and it was her third birth. And I remember her being petrified going through this birth. And as I'm watching everyone talk to her and throw papers in the face, sign this, sign that, do this. I made them stop. And I said, this young lady is literally trembling and you're not paying attention to any of this stuff. And she's done this before. And this. I'm like, yes, she has given birth before, but they've all been C-sections. She's never had anyone check in with her about her feelings or the process of it or her baby or anything. You're just telling her, I'm going to cut you open. You're going to sign this. You're going to lay on this table and this and that. Like, you're completely disconnecting her from this entire experience that has to do with her life and her baby's life. Like, take a moment, right? So just understanding how our system has become so desensitized to including our birthing people in the process. However, they love to victim blame them when it comes unfavorable, right? Like, well, she should have said something, or she should have spoke up, or she should have had this type of whatever to justify her death or justify the loss or the inequity that happened during the experience.
Yeah, it's really historical. And every time I have this conversation, I really have to break down for folks how this really started when midwifery started being usurped. So we started talking about how midwifery was usurped in America. But prior to midwifery being usurped in America, there was some usurpation that actually happened at the hands of the Catholic Church. That was the first usurpation of midwifery, where Catholic priests who really wanted to know and control women's conception, this is where this comes from, wanted to know the secrets of how people were getting pregnant. This is where we start the pro-choice movement, and we start the forced birth movement. And so we see Catholic priests demanding to be in births with women and forcing the midwives upon the order of death to be in these places. And if they don't do it, this is where you get a lot of the talk where you hear this historical conversation about witch burnings. So prior to moving Native American and African American and even white immigrant midwives out of their community spaces in the United States, we have a European movement and other movements around the world where men, these patriarchs, want to take over the birthing space. And so when you hear the word deliver, people are often surprised to know, when we say the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil, the word deliver enters in because the priests never saw women go into that very innate, almost animalistic, no pain medication part of themselves that is really beautiful to become mother. And so, they were like, this is wild. All of this goes on. They need to be delivered from evil. Childbirth is evil, and we need to take this over. And so people don't know this history, and it's not widely known. And so as we move forward and we look particularly at Black women and brown women, because we are the expendable population of women, we keep wondering, all these things are happening. Why aren't these statistics getting better? Why aren't people feeling better about their experiences? And I think it begs the question why we're coming up with solutions, but when we come up with the solutions, are we taking time to unpack the why? Because if we're not willing to call out why it happens and make these connections, then we can't really be sure that the solutions that we're coming up with are synergized to why it's even happening.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of solutions, as a borough president, you've been making history with how you've been allocating funding and making sure that solutions are in place. So I want to kind of go through some of the things that you've been doing. So you have allocated over $45 million for public hospitals, right? And you made history when you allocated your entire fiscal year of 2023 capital funding to Brooklyn's 3 public hospitals for maternal health care improvements, which is the New York City Health and Hospitals, Kings County, right? South Brooklyn. And you mentioned Woodhull. Yes. So congrats on that, because that is big for the community.
Yeah, so a big part of what I wanted to do is no half-stepping, right? What ends up happening with this, in this conversation, is that we keep working at the margins and we barely make any progress. And what happens is Black women continue to die, and they die at high rates. And everybody's throwing their hands up like we don't know what to do. Is you're not doing enough. You're playing too many games. So I wanted to use all my power, all my influence, all my resources available to make a real dent in this and actually affect meaningful change. So the $45 million is all the money I get from the city, and I gave it to 3 public hospitals, Woodhull Hospital. You said South Brooklyn. Most people know it as Coney Island Hospital and Kings County. So we're going to see, and to put in perspective and not in any way to downplay the work that other people are doing, but one hospital in Queens got $2 million, for example, to do a new birthing center. We're giving, on average, $15 million to these hospitals. So we're trying to do internationally renowned sites, something unusual in a positive way, something unique. We don't want it to just be new. We want it to be different because I tell this to folks all the time. In 5 years, when it's not new anymore, what makes it so that you're special? And it's how you look at these spaces. So, some folks already presented me with designs, and I've had to send them back because they're still in the box and they haven't gotten out, and they just want to do more of the same, just making it new. So I pushed back on Kings County when they gave me their first design proposal, and I was like, this is not new. This is not different. This is not going to make a difference. So that was the first part. As we go through this conversation, you'll note that to affect change in this, it's different layers of it. A nice facility is not going to save lives.
That's right.
The facility is it's not even half of the effort. It's who's doing this work. Are midwives empowered through this process? Do these women and birthing people know their rights and what they can and can't say? I'm a council member. I'm deeply knowledgeable of this. And when I had my baby, a nurse was going to take my baby away to go weigh him. And I know that there's a rule now that the baby is supposed to stay with the mother at all times. Right. And while it was happening, I was paralyzed. I couldn't tell her anything. I couldn't stop the nurse from doing it. It's just unusual. You just feel powerless. It was a midwife that was in the room that said, "Where are you taking the baby? Why?" I didn't even ask why. She's like, "Where are you taking the baby? The mother doesn't want you to take the baby. If you need to weigh it, go get the scale, bring it here, and weigh the baby in front of the mother." And for me, it was just like, I felt like a coward. I felt so helpless.
Well, you didn't know.
No, but I did know. And it doesn't matter because the medical professional in the room makes you feel less than. The medical professional in the room makes you feel like you can't question it because it could be your child's life on the line and your wife's life on the line. And I don't want my decisions that are not medically are not medically sound to be the decision. I assume that the nurse is doing it for a medically significant reason, and I don't want to get in the way of that. So it was nerve-wracking. But again, the money's just one part of it. We've been spending money on promoting and marketing. We've got over $250,000 went to Flatbush, East Flatbush, Crown Heights, Brownsville, Canarsie, which is mostly Black, where most of the Black babies are being born. And where Caribbean women are even at a higher rates of mortality. Haitian women, an example, are the ones that are most likely to die than any other category or any other ethnicity in all of the city. So we paid attention to that. So we have Haitian Creole ads now in bus shelters and on YouTube, so that if they're within that area, they're going to get this information. It's going to be available to them. Then we did baby boxes where we got supplies that were put together by the midwives, not by the midwives, by the task force, that includes midwives, of things that they think are important for a new mother to have as soon as they get out of the hospital. And we have 500 of those that were given out throughout the system to 500 new mothers. So again, it's layers and layers of work. We found out Kings County doesn't even have midwives. And we're like, how are we going to make a difference if they're not midwives in Kings County? Now we have conversations with Dr. Katz of Health and Hospitals. Now they're going to have midwives come in. And, the queen midwife, which is Miss Helena Grant here, like, I don't want to underscore, this is not just the midwife that caught my baby, right? This is a premier expert, and you're hearing it here. The premier expert in this work is going to be training those midwives in Kings County so that they're ready to go. But in that training, they got to be empowered. So I talked to the first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright, and said, Sheena, just having these midwives in play is not enough. They got to be They got to lead the process. I need the doctors out. I need the surgeons out. I need the midwives to be the primary the primary leader in these units, and they're moving on that. So there's so much work, and I have more work to do. But what my goal is in 3 more years, which is the first term, I make Brooklyn the safest place for women to have babies in the city. And in 8 years, if I get that pleasure of continuing to be the borough president, it'll be the safest place in the country for Black women to have babies. That's the goal.
That's great. And I love your transparency and your approach. And you bring up a very important word, assumption. Because I think a lot of times we function from that place, right? As first-time parents going through the process, right? And when you know better, you do better, which is what MEternal is all about. Like, we built this platform so that women of color, mothers of color can have access. They can have information. We don't have to operate from a state of assumption, right? We can make, great choices when it comes to our family's care. And we're so happy that you are a part of these conversations, because this is how statistically things start to change.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. And Ms. Grant being on this platform is extremely important, because I got the knowledge. She taught me, she mentored me on this, but I'm one person. I'm trying to do my part. But to be on this show, to just the work that we're doing with the promotional materials and the funding that we gave for educational materials is what we need, because an informed pregnant person is the most powerful thing that we can bring to this process. So I'm very grateful that you have us here, even being able to speak on this.
Oh, same, likewise.
I think also not just an informed pregnant person, but an informed community and family members, right?
Yes.
So I want to give you kudos as a father for understanding that you also play a significant role in the success of your wife, being able to birth and have a favorable outcome, right? Just pulling in other fathers and partners so that they know, like, they are the key to making sure all of these processes come together is really, really an important point to make. I'm not sure if you're familiar with For Cure for Moms, or Charles Johnson and the story of his wife and how she actually passed away, to something you were saying earlier, where his wife was going through some things, and he noticed there was an issue. He alerted the hospital. They did nothing. And he sat there like really confused, like, should I say something? Are they going to tell me I'm over exaggerating? Like, kind of questioning himself from seeing what he's seeing, but also saying, like, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not that person that really has that significant weight, right? But unfortunately, when she passed away, these are, residual thoughts of, maybe I should have spoke up a little bit more, or maybe I should have did something different, but a lot of people, especially people of color and Black men, are often so afraid of being the angry Black man and having this stigma of, if I'm standing up, or if I'm, asserting myself to make sure that my wife or my partner has the support that she needs, I'm going to be perceived as angry and threatening, and I'll be completely removed. So I think what you're doing is powerful, because you're understanding where you're sitting and how you also can organize more fathers and more partners to be a part of this process. But I think you're taking it also a step further in your space as a public advocate, by showing how you can organize your community and use your political voice to activate more people. So I just have one question for you. How can we get more political engagement and political partners to do the same thing that you're doing, speaking from their own experiences as parents and even as children, right? So, like, how was their birthing experience with their mother? But how can we get more political engagement like you, more familiar or
I would say, so a couple of things that, and I just want to say that I didn't want to be the angry Black man in the room in any case, but the most ignorant person that knows nothing about this process should be able to have a safe birth, right? Like, you don't need you should never have to advocate. It's something we're teaching because of the circumstances we have and the infrastructure, or the structures that exist in society. You should never have to. That process should be, it should be a peaceful, like, very deep spiritual process that folks go through, in which you never have to feel like you need to defend somebody. And that is not the case, but I'm working on that. We're working on that. And to get folks politically involved, I would say that something that has been great is that there are more black men in positions of power when it comes to elected office. So what you're seeing is as these black men grow through these process of having their babies born, right? So they have daughters and sons. They see it. And what you get is the strongest advocates. Public advocate Jamani Williams just had a baby that was born premature. And you see him and the work that he's doing in advancing the cause of maternal health is extremely, it's amazing what the work he's doing. I went to a 100 black men conference where I was talking about this when I was running for office. And who was there? It was Mayor Eric Adams before he was mayor, also there, ready to speak after me. When we finished, he came up to me. He's like, if I win, I got you. I'm going to make this happen. And he's been helpful in this process. So now we got three players in this movement. And then if we're talking about it so much, other people buy into it. And what you've seen, the all-women city council or the majority women city council just passed a ton of legislation that does data research and things that we're going to be able to peel the why, right? We're going to be able to talk about the why. Like, where did we come from? Because we can't unpeel it if we don't know what we're looking at. So that's happened. At the state level, for example, there was a big fight that Medicaid only pays 3 months of mental health services for women for postpartum depression. Only 3 months of services you can get. Like, depression goes away after 3 months. It has a timeline. The state government just extended that to 1 year, which I think it should be indefinite, but that's progress. Like, we're seeing folks starting to get there. I actually think the last 3 years have been the best years for maternal health conversations that we've ever had in the city of New York. And now it's front and center. My work and what I've done has put everybody on notice. Everyone knows what I'm doing. And they're calling on other borough presidents, on other elected officials. It's like you hear what Antonio's doing, you hear what the borough president of Brooklyn is doing. And it's like my light is gonna shine for everybody. So we're gonna keep it up. But I do feel like I'm very happy because I don't want pats on my back. I don't want to be thought as the person that did this. If I got other people talking about it, outshining me, then that means black women's lives are being saved. So it's just like, it's been great. It's just been great the last couple of years to really see the progress that we've made.
That's great. And I feel like none of us as a community are exempt, right? Like, we're all going through this together. I'm glad that Jay brought up Charles S. Johnson, because he has a great quote that we lead this platform with. And it says, the Black maternal health crisis is the American maternal health crisis. There is no de-alienation. If we can fix this for black women, we can fix this for everybody. Absolutely.
I say black women every time I speak because people need to know, right? Like, that's the house on fire, right? That's the problem. So you need to know that there's a house on fire, but it doesn't mean that the fire department doesn't help all, right? So for me, it's just like, it is a black maternal health crisis, but the new maternal health, like, birthing rooms, midwives being in place, that's going to help black, brown, white, Chinese. It doesn't matter what you are. You're going to benefit from all those new perks that exist because we're helping protect black women. So you're right. And it goes back to it. It's always black women at the center of helping us get out of a bunch of these holes, whether it's like democracy, whether it's mental health services, maternal health services, mental health services. So, again, I'm just really proud of the work that the Maternal Health Task Force is doing. And the fact that I get to put my name on it is just like icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, you're very humble about it, right?
No, he is. He is. He gives me so much credit, but I want to give him credit because I could have been talking to him and he could have said, that's not that serious to me. Like, I'm the big bad councilman. But he was always like, tell me more. Like, there was a point, and he doesn't really acknowledge this, where he was asking me questions. I wasn't having to approach him. He was asking me questions. And it is really important to really center this conversation around patient experience and what it means to be in the space. So, around in the medical community, we're doing a lot of simulation. What happens if a person has a heart attack? What happens if they're hemorrhaging? We need that. But we need conscious conversations, too, that unpack. I often get, I kind of get quoted and in trouble for saying implicit bias is so 2018. Like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, let's talk about how can we marry anti-racism work to this crisis? How can we talk about the experiences of Black and brown birthing people, the fathers and the families in the space? When are we going to simulate that? When are we going to simulate the fact that we have providers who go in a room who want to examine a woman? She's crying and screaming up the bed, and she tells you to stop, and you don't want to stop. Right. When are we going to unpack that a lot of this is happening because there is the psychology of ownership in the medical community over Black people and especially Black women's bodies that is descending from the plantation. Hello, somebody. And so, you know, we're really not marrying the why. And so when we're having these new generation of medical providers that are coming up, and we're just teaching them how to supposedly be good doctors or be good medical providers, but we're not inserting those conversations and really demonstrating to them what they should not do and calling out the behaviors that happen in the space that are problematic. Those behaviors that are violent in the space become the morbidities. They become the mortalities. And so if we're not having these greater conversations that center on who we are as a people and what we need in the space, then what are we really doing? And so what I appreciate about Antonio deeply is that he really understands that it's not just about making the space beautiful. Right? Because you could have hell go on in a palace, right? Yeah. It's really about saying we have to change the culture and we have to make sure that the people in the space are having the belief systems that marry to how the space looks. All right? And that is really what's going to change the trajectory of these outcomes.
For sure. And when you talk about these greater conversations, like, that's why we're all here today, right? Yeah. We want to amplify these conversations. We want to make sure that we give a voice to mothers of color so that they feel heard and that their stories are shared and their experiences are shared, right? Because just we'll learn more and we know how to approach it from a more practical standpoint. So you're already doing a ton of work. Like, what's next for your initiative and what can we look forward to?
Well, we got several steps left to do. We got to do some research and data. And we're really getting into the policy decisions about what hospitals do to be successful or to not be successful. The city of New York, health and hospitals, every single hospital has a different CEO, and they each have their own identity and the authority as to how they want to see their hospitals work. When it comes to maternal health, we don't need that. We don't need your opinion to be what dictates policy. We have proven things that work, and we want to be able to execute that across the board. Because even in midwives, right? Midwives, Ms. Grant is to me is very special, but the next midwife might not think the way Ms. Grant is thinking. So my thing is I'm not just empowering her because she's a midwife. I'm empowering her because of the way she thinks and what she's trying to push. So I need her everywhere. That's first and foremost, right? I need her to be in. She's already in Woodhull. She's educating people in Kings County. But we got to talk about Coney Island. So we're doing that work now. Again, I said the mayor's office reached out to me and is getting invested in a more meaningful way. And I think that could make progress. And also I want to encourage people to go to these public hospitals to have their babies. That's another thing. Not just people that are on Medicaid, not just people that are poor. It's like everyone should go to these public hospitals because it makes a difference and they are safe. So I want to also do a lot of promoting of these public hospitals and then the design of these spaces. I'm just not playing any games. I just don't want people showing me whack designs. Like, they got to get to it. So I already talked to Dr. Katz. I was like, I'll put all my money if I think that they're doing average work or mediocre work. I expect something extraordinary. So I have very high standards. And I'm looking forward to that design process and what that looks like. And then I also got some some private hospitals in Brookdale and Wyckoff that are also hospitals that have large amounts of Black women having babies. And they need a lot of help. And theirs a little more difficult because I have a lot of control and say and influence in public hospitals, not so much in private hospitals. So if I give the money there, it could literally go to just building a new space and none of the policies that we're talking about being implemented. So I'm trying to figure out a way to leverage that. So it's a lot more work to do. Year one was big. We got to keep it up.
Yeah, well, you're getting it done. And we thank you for coming up here today on the MEternal podcast. We hope you will join us again and help us to continue these important conversations around the Black maternal health crisis. And where can folks connect with you and find out more information about your initiatives?
So it's all on the Brooklyn Borough President's website. So you can go Brooklyn Borough President and click on it. You'll find it, but it's brooklyn-usa.org. It was done in Marty Markowitz's time. He didn't know how to use the internet back then, so he chose a terrible name, but it is what it is. But please go on the website, inform yourself. There's resources there that are available to you, and also you can get engaged. We're considering expanding our board, our task force, so we're trying to do a bunch of things. So please get on, and I want to thank you for having us on and allowing us to speak on this important issue and the work that you've already done before we even got here. It just it brings me joy every time I see people talk about this and see how many people are invested, and we got to keep it up. We got to keep it up.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you and what you're doing in the community for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, and we have just been joined by Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso and Helena Grant on the MEternal podcast on iHeartRadio. I am Kenya Gibson with my co-host Jay Wilson, and until next time.